Hi everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again. Now it's time for episode 100 and, this is episode 118 of Album of the Day, and, in which, I'm pretty excited to do this review today. It's, for one of my favorite albums of the year so far. It's a review for an album from an Australian band that, have been pretty prolific since, 2012, putting out so many different records and their music is sort of like a blend of like some psych rock, some indie rock, and garage rock, and they sort of were a band that sort of became part of like the lo-fi craze that started out in the late 2000s and the early 2010s with other artists like Ty Segall and stuff like that. The band that I'm talking about today is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, and I'm here to review their latest album, which came out late April 2016 on Flightless in their home country, Australia, and ATO Records in the US. So it's a shout out to you guys at ATO. The album is called Nonagon Infinity, and I am very enthusiastic to talk about this record because this one is easily one of my favorite records of the year. I mean, this album is just so killer, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But anyway, let's just show you the packaging for it before I get on to the actual review. Some really awesome artwork on this, so at least that succeeds in that department. There are the liner notes, and there's a CD, and yeah, and weird face on that photograph on that picture right there, which is of like the band's frontman, Stu McKenzie. Anyway, there's a booklet here. It's got the lyrics and pictures of all 7 band members. And there's a picture of all of them. So yeah, that's the packaging for the new King Gizzard album, Nonagon Infinity. So yeah, so the band has pretty much been pretty prolific since like 2012, and they put out like 2 records in 2014 and 2015. So yeah, these guys pretty much are one of the few bands that pretty much doesn't really stop making music for their fans and stuff like that. So so who knows, they may drop another album later this year, but you just never know. But this album is really my first time listening to this band, and I'm so glad that I decided to go check it out, because this record, it won me over by storm, pretty much. The first few times I listened to it, I thought, this is a pretty cool record. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. But, like several more listens in, I'm just like, wow. I am like speechless right now, right now. So to the point where I'm feeling like probably maybe a 9 out of 10 on this. So expect a pretty glowing review of this record. So yeah. Now the concept behind this record is pretty neat. The album, it has no beginning and it has no end. It's an infinite loop, meaning, every track on this album sequences into one another really cohesively and really nicely. The closing track, literally cycles back into the opening track, pretty prominently. Sure, there are a couple of records that have the closer play into the opener. Def Cab for Cutie's Transatlanticism, or actually the new Lemon Demon record also does that too. But none spin into infinity as, awesomely and as, and as cohesively as this album does. So the album opens with the song Robot Stop, which is a great track, with some awesome riffs, that are very melodic at the same time, definitely very sort of, it's definitely very melodic, but at the same time, it's adrenaline fueled, it's ballsy, it's intense, it's gutsy, it's in your face, it's definitely pretty, it's a pretty high energy record that, will definitely, have you just kind of going crazy and going nuts to it, but not in a way that's like corny or anything like that. So this song has great riffs on it, and it opens with pretty much the hook that ties this whole record together. Nonagon infinity opens the door. Nonagon infinity opens the door. Wait for the answer to open the door. Nonagon infinity opens the door. And this track, not only are the riffs great, but like the instrumental break in the middle of this song is awesome. I love how they allow in sort of a break for multiple solos. You get a howling harmonica solo, some amazing guitar licks on this track. The long instrumental break really just shows the band's uncanny ability to improvise and just have a lot of fun with it. And of course, some catchy vocal melodies on this track, that are pretty earwormy, and also, and while the vocals are kind of muffled and kind of fuzzed out and have these weird little manipulations on them, they still, Stu's lyrics are still readable and stuff like that. They're actually pretty dark. If you look very closely, he talks a lot about death and, stuff like that, and so, of course, and I think the artwork and stuff like that sort of shows that this record definitely has quite a bit of a dark, freaky side to it, and yeah, I am just loving it. Moving on from there, we get into Big Fig Wasp, which, has some pretty cool riffs on it as well, and there are some pretty, dark lyrics on this track, sort of referring to this, this sort of, I think this may be a fictional insect that he's like referring to as like a wing machine, and also, and talking about talking about hornets, in his throat or something like that. And like, so it's kind of a track that, again shows some pretty sort of vivid imagery. Which is a thing that goes through pretty much in the artwork and in like the lyrics and the story that this album is. It is a concept record, not necessarily like a super big story record, but it certainly does have some sort of overlapping themes going on this record. And there's like one point in the song where during the guitar solo, I swear I heard like an actual wasp, like buzzing, like bzzz, like it sounds like a field recording that was like recorded outside or something like that. It's pretty interesting how they incorporate that in this track. But probably my favorite track comes after that, which is the song Gamma Knife. Great track, some just amazing riffs, and eventually you do get a pretty, cool, guitar and drum improvisation. It's, sounds great and very off-kilter, and, definitely one of my favorite moments on this record, with the kind of, and the guitar kind of has this weird kind of, twangy sort of feel to it. And then also there's some pretty cool harmonized guitar and harmonica, on this track. And, of course, this track, definitely has, some pretty readable but yet pretty unsettling lyrics on it. It has like lyrics, and the pair with the lead vocal, there's these almost army-like male group vocals of "Gamma" in the background of this track, that I also love on this track. But then you get into this sinister People-Vultures, which has just these really sinister guitar melodies. That, play throughout the song, and it just sounds awesome. As well as this kind of, dramatic sort of, squealing organ in the background, as well as, lyrics about, like, these People-Vultures, waiting to begin, and like deadly ulcers feeding on skin, and wild dogs escaped from their cage. This album definitely does feel like getting locked into this psych rock octagon, and it kind of feels like getting dragged into the depths of psych rock and garage rock hell, but in a good way, I must say. I think this is one song that really does show it with its guitar melodies and some lyrics that really do sort of, hit you right here, hit you right here, something like that. As well as this pretty cool guitar improvisation that has these glitchy keyboards that fly around in there as well. But not all the tracks on here are necessarily like adrenaline fueled, or are intense or anything like that. The band does manage to take a little break from that on the song Mr. Beat, the very next track on here, which is one of the more melodic, one of the more sort of, calmer tracks on the album. Has these real pretty sweet, guitars and keyboards, this marching band, some marching band drums on the song, as well as this catchy little vocal hook of "Once I missed a beat, only missed a beat," and lyrically it kind of takes a break from some of the more some of the more devilish references, on this track. It's probably a more somber cut, and the organ on this track, has this strong Southern soul kind of flavor to it that, I think is pretty neat. But then we also have a keyboard solo on the track, which I really like that. And plus I do like that keyboard solo that goes on in the track. And, then eventually there's some weird little vocal things going on. He's almost like Stu McKenzie is almost like whispering at the end of this track, to pair with the closing guitar riff. After that, you get the song Evil Death Roll, which is the longest song on the record, and it's 7 minutes long, but don't let that stop you. This is one of the best tracks on the record, in my opinion. I love sort of the weird musical passages that this track has in it, and again, it shows the band's, uncanny ability to improvise and just, have fun with it and still make it engaging on this track. The song has, has some pretty dark lyrics that do talk about death, like, there are lyrics in there about, like, severing limbs and stuff like that, and, it's probably not the strongest lyrical moment on the album, but still, musically, this track is just undeniable with its searing riffs and keyboards on the track. There's a bunch of weird little crackly guitar sounds going on this track, as well as some synthesizers that are pretty off-kilter on the track, along with the drums on here. And also I forgot to mention, this song and most of the track listing here has these sort of distant shouts of "ooh" going on in there. It just shows that they're just having fun on this record. I'm having fun, so they're having fun, so I can have fun listening to it, pretty much. I love that. There are a few and it does contain some of the lyrics that are on the next track, Invisible Face, which I think is pretty cool. Cool, it makes sense because they included some of the lyrics on Robot Stop from Big Fig Wasp to make it just feel like one long 40-minute cohesive piece, with this whole track listing. And at one point in the track, all the instruments drop out except the... And also I do like that little organ solo in the middle that sort of mimics the hook, the Nonagon Infinity hook that plays throughout this record. And also I do like the part in this track where all the instruments drop out except for some guitars and keyboards, but they still manage to make it sound engaging, and it actually sounds kind of beautiful in that moment, And then eventually it goes right into the madness and back into that just enraging hook on that track, which eventually leads into the song Invisible Face, which, is probably, honestly, my least favorite track on this album, mostly because, I do like, the hook on that track. The intro I thought was good, but then the middle instrumental on that track, which had a kind of loungy feel to it, I thought was a little lazy and maybe a little underwhelming and seemed like the band just kind of indulging rather than just making something engaging, But then eventually it does lead into the song Wah Wah, which isn't my favorite song on the record. This, I would admit, the first half is actually a little better than the second half is, but still, this track has some pretty cool melodies on it. I think the vocal melody I think the vocal and acoustic guitar melody on this track is pretty infectious. And I think, the instrumental is pretty cool. It's kind of a woozy, almost sort of, it's a more woozy kind of instrumental on the record. And then in the middle of this track, you get, there's a weird instrument that appears in the middle of this track, and it's some weird kind of Middle Eastern wind instrument called the zurma that's actually getting used on here. It's a pretty underrated instrument, and it isn't used very often in psych rock, mostly because it's an instrument that doesn't really have distortion or much of an it doesn't have much of an acidic sort of feel to it that you would get in psych rock a little bit, but they just play it as if it's just psych as hell on this track. And then it closes with the song Road Train, which, is kind of a fast, punky, track that has a little bit of maybe a Black Sabbath tinge to it. Actually has a little bit of a Black Sabbath tinge to it, has easily some of the darkest and some of the most just unsettling lyrics on this album. I think I'm hearing a lot of satanic references on this song, like oily, fiery rain, and, the spawn of Satan's back. It comes to bring you, it comes to bring you shame. It comes to kill and maim. And the vocals on this track are really sinister and kind of, devilish and especially with, the shouts of, Road Train on this track. But also, I love kind of the fast riff on this track. I also love, the fast riff on this track. It really closes out the album with a bang, pretty much. And I love how the fast guitars and drums sort of syncopate with one another. It's, kind of a, dizzying kind of, instrumental here. It's all here. And, the song has, this weird guitar solo in the middle, which I really like as well. And the song... And then eventually, the song has this sort of, repeating hook at the end that goes that says, Nonagon Infinity is coming, eventually, letting us know that the album's not over, because it's gonna spin forever. forever pretty much. And then eventually it plays, and eventually, the first little part of Robot Stop plays, and then eventually it, plays back into it, and, pretty much goes on and on from there. So, yeah, I think on from there. I mean, there's not one moment on here that's like, hey, we're done here. This is the end of the record. It's just like, it's the last song on the record, but it ain't over yet. It just cycles, it just cycles back into it. And, I just love how it does that. I think it's a really interesting concept for this record. Well, the band's pretty conceptual with their records. I mean, their last full-length album, Paper Mache Dream Balloon, I hear was like a totally acoustic album where they, but it wasn't just simply acoustic guitars. They picked up all kinds of acoustic instruments like flute and clarinet and stuff like that. On here, however, the amplifiers, they're up to 11. This thing is definitely heavily electric. Excuse me. And acoustic guitars do occasionally pop up, but, it's pretty rare as a lot of the instrumentation is pretty, ballsy and intense here on this album. So yeah, this record, it's a great album. Seriously, it is. I highly recommend checking it out. Man, it's been a great year for psych and garage rock. Pretty much. There's been so many albums in that genre that have been fantastic. Like that new Ty Segall record, Emotional Mugger, as well as that new Drones album, Feeling Kind of Free, which I gave a really positive review for along. And then also recently, a record that I've been loving lately, and that's a psych rock album, is the new VOC's record, A Weird Exits. I might review that sometime, but who knows, depends if the spirit moves me. But still, none of those records, but still, although those records are great, they all pale in comparison to the awesomeness of this record right here. Or at least in my opinion, lots of people have given this an 8 out of 10, so it has been getting critical acclaim, but, since I've loved this album almost to death pretty much, I know it sounds dramatic considering that is actually one of the themes of the album, but you get what I'm getting at here. This album blows my mind every time I hear it. So I'm definitely feeling a strong 9 out of 10 for this album. So I think this is going to be my favorite psych rock album of the year, and I'm probably the only reviewer right now that has given this a 9 out of 10 review, but come on, this album is great. Just check it out. Get out before too long. Just enough procrastinating. If you love psych rock, if you love garage rock, if you want a record that's, very punky, fast, and has a lot of adrenaline to it, that, sort of shows a band just having fun, well then, look no further than this record. I couldn't recommend it more. So, that's my review of the spectacular record, Nonagon Infinity, by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I'll see you for episode 119.